Okay, I think that's it. We are recording. So I jumped ahead. I've already done the agenda. And so we'll go on to introductions. I'll start with myself. I'm Felicity, and I'm on the editorial board services team here at PLOS. And we work essentially with all of our editorial boards on the different journals. Our job is to make sure you're all happy and engaged, and we basically work with all of you. Do we have Charlene or Rochelle on the call?
We don't have Rochelle in the call. Charlene is in the call, but she may not be able to talk because she's got contractors in with her, so she may be coming and going. So if
Okay, no problem. I'll hand it over to you then, Carly, to introduce yourself.
I'm Carly. I think I've spoken to some of you maybe because I noticed we have some of our section editors in the audience, but I haven't spoken to the academic editors. So I'm the executive editor of PLOS Mental Health. So my role is really kind of overseeing the strategy of the journal, making sure that we're being inclusive and we're not annoying anybody. I started at PLOS in July. Prior to that, I was at Springer Nature for 2.5 years, where I was the deputy editor of a journal called Communications Biology. So there I was overseeing the neuroscience content and was in charge of training and recruiting editorial board members. And I was also the consulting editor for another journal called Communications Medicine, where I oversaw their mental health content. Prior to that, all of my experience was actually academia. So I was in academia for 15 years, specifically different flavors of neuroscience. So some cognitive neuroscience, but mostly cellular molecular neuroscience. So my interest in mental health is predominantly a personal one. So I myself have bipolar disorder. So I'm very driven by bringing lived experience to the publishing industry. And it was really exciting to me to help lead this journal and make sure that we're actually going to give a voice to the communities that the journal is trying to help. And I'm really grateful to all of you for agreeing to help us with that. And I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you so much, Carly. So we have a little bit of a icebreaker now. I've just been looking through the chat at what everyone shared before, all your different temperatures, and I'm quite shocked by the Helena's temperature. You must be very cold, -35. So I have a poll to share now, if I can figure it out. Okay, here we go. This is just gonna figure out where you all are from. So the first question I can see is not appropriate. This is the first mental health webinar we've done, and we clearly haven't updated the poll, so you can feel free to skip that. Then we've got how many years have you been an active researcher? How many editorial boards do you serve on? And yeah, where are you calling from? Looks like we have a little bit of a mix. Give it another few seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. It looks like we have a really good mix of how long have you been an active researcher, a few mid-career, a few more experienced. Hopefully if I end the poll, we'll get the results. I click share. Can you see the results? that's exciting. We have people in Africa, Asia, and Europe. That's a good mix, but possibly expected given the time zone. Okay, let's move on. So I think I'm now going to pass over to Carly. So I'll stop sharing. Nope. Okay, over to you, Carly.
Well, there's going to be a lot of clicking in and out and sharing and not sharing and awkward silences and me mumbling whilst I figure out what to do. But hopefully you can see that. So someone unmute and shout at me if you can't. I'm just going to start off by briefly talking about PLOS mental health in terms of what our vision is, just to get everyone on the same page. A lot of this information has been available through our communication, but I think it's just nice that we just spend a few moments talking about it. So why is that not moving? Oh, it's a link. That's good. What's going on here then? There we go. So this is PLOS Mental Health's mission. And obviously there's a lot of different things that the journal cares about, that the journal wants to highlight moving forward. And this is something that is going to be flexible and will make room for different priorities as we go along. But as we were recruiting, particularly the section editors for the journal, I think we had 3 themes that really came across as kind of something that everyone was really passionate about and something that really emerged as, you know, this is exactly where we're going to have our priorities as the journal starts. The first one is lived experience. So as I mentioned at the start, I myself am bipolar, and one of our editor-in-chiefs, Charlene, is coming very much from the lived experience background on the global mental health peer support network that she set up. So we've really got strong voices on this journal driving the lived experience aspect. And as you probably know, we have a specific lived experience section with lived experience section editors, but we do welcome submissions covering lived experience across all of the different fields that the journal covers. And really what we're aiming to do with this is just to increase the impact that lived experience voices and communities have on research, on treatments, on policies. And also we really want to try to play a role in reducing the stigma associated with mental health. In addition to this, it's really important for us that this journal really encourages interdisciplinary communication. We would like to get all the different voices from all the different fields around the same table and making sure that the journal provides a home for all mental health related research, because we've had a lot of feedback that a lot of researchers in the field feel like, you know, that their research encompasses a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they're not really sure where an ideal home for their work would be. So, you know, our vision is that PLOS Mental Health is a home for this. And we really want to enhance that crosstalk between the different disciplines and hopefully optimize information sharing. And hopefully this will have a knock-on effect on implementation of policies and support approaches. And then, of course, we are, you know, very much interested in improving global access, helping to improve global access to mental health care and really stimulating discussion about existing measures that exist and how those can be improved, and how that can improve mental health care globally, individual context, communities, and especially in the case of adversity. To take a quote from Rochelle, one of our EICs, what we really hope this journal can do is challenge the status quo to address these inequalities. As a journal, as is the case with a lot of the PLOS journals in this portfolio, we want to avoid elitism, and we mean that in several contexts. So in terms of, say, novelty, we don't want to just consider stories that have an advance. They just need to be solid work that is of interest to a community. That can be a very small specialized community, but as long as there is a community that would find the work useful, then PLOS Mental Health would be a home for that work. We also want to avoid elitism in terms of language. So for instance, we're not looking for perfectly expressed work, as long as between the way it's written and the figures, the reviewers could fairly review the paper, then, you know, we're not expecting really well expressed work, because we know that the first language of most authors is not going to be English, and we're not going to penalise for that. And of course, we're going to avoid elitism in terms of financial situation. So PLOS Mental Health is under the same APC model as PLOS Global Public Health, where the APC is not a barrier to publication. And we have a number of measures in place that we're happy to go into more detail about at some point, where, you know, even individuals could apply for APC waivers. And just to point out, this is something that is done on submission rather than on acceptance. So the author knows as soon as they submit whether or not they're going to get a partial or full waiver, so it saves some, you know, time down the line. We're also going to be keeping equity, diversity and inclusion at the forefront of really every decision we're making for the journal. We're going to keep this in mind in terms of our author pool, so, you know, who we're commissioning from, who we're trying to attract submissions from. But this also applies to our editorial board as well, and our reviewers. We want to make sure that all parties involved in the peer review process are coming from a diverse background. And it's really important to us as well that we're going to be amplifying the work of impacted communities specifically. As you can see, we have at the moment 16 sections. These sections, which you will all be a part of, encompass what we feel is the breadth of mental health related expertise. This may be flexible down the line, but this is something that we've settled on for now. There's obviously going to be a lot of overlap in these areas. So you may be placed in one area, but you may receive a paper that is relevant to another area, but, you know, by nature, we're all quite interdisciplinary. So, you know, and we do want to encourage that crosstalk between the different sections. As we mentioned, we're really lucky to have two very passionate EICs. We have Charlene Sunkel and Rochelle Burgess. So as I mentioned, Charlene is the founder and CEO of the Global Mental Health Peer Network. And really it comes from the background of lived experience, advocacy and human rights. And we also have Rochelle Burgess, who's based at UCL, University College London, and she's an associate professor there, who's a community health psychologist. And both are really, you know, I'm going to try and do them justice and speak for both of them, but obviously I can't do them much justice, but they're both very driven to bring, you know, lived experience to the journal, making sure that we are enabling that crosstalk, making sure that we are accessing and hearing from everyone that we should be hearing from in order to make a difference. So I think with that, I'm going to hand back to Felicity.
Great, thank you. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. So I'll dive right in. Our PLOS editorial boards tend to be a little bit larger than you might be familiar with in more subject-specific or society journals. And that's because we want to have a broad coverage of geography. Like Carly said, we aim to have diverse editorial boards in terms of geography, career stage, and as well interdisciplinary subject areas. We have quite a broad scope as well, and high volume of manuscripts submitted. So the editorial board is made up of section editors and academic editors. I imagine the majority of you are all academic editors, but I'll briefly mention the section editor role as well. They are a sort of higher level editor who advises on subject-specific issues, more kind of tricky manuscripts that need a bit more experience to handle. And they're also have a role in engagement within their section and their community. And then the academic editors, that's you, I imagine. You oversee the peer review process and to a large degree are responsible in determining what we should publish or not. We recruit our editors through application. So people on my team vet every candidate we look at based on a number of criteria, including experience and your subject area as well. And I will show you this link, which brings you to the PLOS Mental Health Editorial Board on our website, and you can search by classifications or sections. So if I select psychiatry, then you can see all the editors that we have who have a classification of psychiatry. So you can find out who you're serving on the editorial board with. Okay. So, sorry about that. So next we have the academic editor role. So primarily you oversee the peer review process, and I'd like to emphasize that's ideally from the beginning to the end. We'd really like to encourage you to hold on to your manuscripts from throughout the peer review process. But your role is conducting an initial assessment using the PLOS publication criteria. If you decide to send the manuscript out to peer review, you will be responsible for finding and inviting your reviewers. You'll evaluate their feedback and make an editorial decision based on that, and also your own judgment of the manuscript. And you'll also communicate the decision to the author through a decision letter. And so you do have quite an important role within the journal as a representative of PLOS within your community. And I have another link to show you. So we have a number of quick guides, which hopefully you'll have a chance to have a look at, and they go into a little bit more detail about the role and responsibilities. And I should be showing you some more in a little bit about making decisions and those kind of other aspects of the role. But please do have a look through this. It outlines the expectations of the role, how many manuscripts you might be expected to handle, that kind of thing. There's a link to the code of conduct, which I'll be going into as well, and also our editorial board values. So please do have a look at that. And I think that is our next slide. So we take publication and research ethics very seriously here at PLOS, and we do expect our editorial board members to do the same. This code of conduct can be found on our editor center. So please do take a few minutes to read through and click on some of the links for a little bit more detail. I just want to highlight a couple that we do come across sometimes. Selfless editing and peer review. We expect editors to facilitate peer review without self-interest, avoid advancing your own work. Things like requesting citations should really be avoided. And of course, maintaining confidentiality and keeping diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind. Things like competing interests are very important. So please do take a few minutes to read this, as we would expect you to adhere to these this code of conduct. So Editorial Manager is our submission system. It's provided by a company called Aries. And as you're starting out on the journal, the first things you'd want to do are update your information, your areas of expertise, and potentially also I'll show you about unavailability dates. So keeping your information up to date is really important, especially your contact detail. That is how your email is how we correspond with you, obviously, and send your invitation to handle manuscripts through those. So please keep them up to date. I will show you, we have actually another guide to show you how to use Editorial Manager. And so you can click through, how to log in. I'd recommend you indicate your areas of expertise, because that will help you receive high quality manuscript invitations. So ones that are in your subject area. Our invitations go out based on the classifications that are in your profile. So it is really important. It'll help you and it'll help us to make sure you get invitations in your subject area. So once you've logged in, you can scroll down to within your profile, and there'll be a sort of tab, a drop-down tab called Areas of Interest or Expertise, and you can add classifications, which are sort of predefined terms from our taxonomy within mental health. But you can also add personal keywords, which are free text options for things that are maybe a little bit more specific or niche to your subject area. And this just kind of shows in a little bit more detail. You'll enter your classifications here, search them and add them, select them and then add them, and they'll appear on the right. Don't forget to select submit to save those changes. This goes into how to update. So I would want to highlight as well that we understand you have lives outside of being an academic editor, and there are times when you need to set yourself as unavailable so that you don't receive any manuscript invitations. That is absolutely fine. It's just easier so that you don't receive those invitations if you're on field work or holiday or medical leave or for whatever reason. If possible, add unavailable dates. They're within your profile. If you scroll down to institution information at the bottom of there, you'll see them. And you can also note, you don't need to put a reason, it's your personal life, that's fine, but you can note if you're available to handle revisions, that kind of thing, or if you're not going to have internet access. I think that's everything I needed to say about that. Yeah, I just would really highlight that adding your areas of expertise as classifications in your profile is really essential for your manuscript invitations. Okay, I'll just go through the life of a manuscript at a very high level. Obviously, this all starts with an author submitting a manuscript, but we have lots of internal technical checks and other checks that happen by staff editors before the manuscript even comes into your inbox. Subscan is what our staff editors do to check for basic things like, does it have ethics? Does it meet scope? Does it meet the publication criteria? So the manuscripts that you're invited to handle have been assessed by a staff editor and have had some sort of pre-screening. We then move to academic editor assignment, and that's where you're invited to handle manuscripts. And at this point, you do have the option to reject without peer review if you don't think the manuscript meets the publication criteria. If you do think it should go through peer review, then you will solicit reviews. you'll submit a decision. There are more technical checks. There's lots of different stages and work that goes into each manuscript with internal checks. The decision comes to the author, and then this cycle will continue. The author will revise the manuscript, and there'll be more checks, and we'll keep going through this revision cycle until the paper is either rejected or ultimately accepted and published. Let's check. Okay, so I've mentioned the invitations you'll receive to handle manuscripts. As I said, they come through email, so do keep your email up to date. And on mental health, they are sent through term-based matching. Like I've said a couple of times now, that it's based on the classifications that are listed in your manuscript, in your profile, sorry. I will highlight that you do have the choice to accept or decline invitations. When you receive an email from us with an invitation to handle a manuscript, that is an invitation, it's not an assignment. I think sometimes new editors feel obliged to accept manuscript invitations, but you really don't have to. And I would say, if you either accidentally click accept, that does happen, more than you would imagine. And if you have a closer look at the manuscript and realise maybe that this isn't in your subject area, or actually something comes up and you're not able to handle the manuscript anymore, that's fine. Just please do reach out to us, and we can pass the manuscript to a different editor. It's just better for everyone if you just reach out to us, and then we can move the manuscript on more quickly. And we have another quick guide on invitations, and these will go through. You can have a closer look at this, but it goes through what the invitations will look like. The subject will always have PLOS mental health and invitation to handle manuscript number. You'll get the manuscript number, the title, and author list. And the abstract will be at the bottom with keywords. So, and then there'll be a link to either accept or decline. So from this, you should be able to determine if it's in your area of expertise. And also you can have a look at the author list. If you know anyone and you think you would have a competing interest, then obviously don't accept to handle the manuscript. And yeah, there's a little bit more about your classification matching, the mechanism we use. Okay. Yeah, so just make sure you have time to handle a manuscript when you decide to accept as well, because ideally, like I said before, we'd want you to be handling it from the start to the finish of peer review. Okay. This is another high-level overview of the peer review timeline, what we'd broadly expect at this journal. And I understand that different subject areas might have slight differences in the generally expected timeframe, but ideally the initial evaluation you would complete within a few days. You'll find and secure the reviewers in a couple of weeks, and ideally the manuscript would be with those reviewers for another 2 to 3 weeks, and on receipt of those completed reviews, you'd make the decision in another few days. So that's just a guide there. And again, ideally you will hold on to the manuscript for this whole period, but if anything comes up, just reach out to us. And I think now it's time to go back to Carly, so I will stop screen sharing and hand over to you.
So I just wanted to talk briefly about the different stages of handling the manuscript and what we're really looking for at each of those stages. So if you kindly accept the invitation to handle a manuscript, we would ask that the initial evaluation is typically done within 3 or 4 days. What we're asking for at this point really is to assess the manuscript according to the editorial bar and criteria of the journal. And as I mentioned at the start, specifically what we're looking for is rigor as opposed to novelty. It's great if there's some novelty there, but if there isn't, that's absolutely not a problem. And as I'm sure you can understand in this field in particular, having negative results and replication studies is just as important as having positive results. As I mentioned, really, we just want the paper to be of interest to a community. There will be some information that's flagged up to you that's been left there by our internal staff who have done the technical checks. These will be visible and I'll just talk about them shortly. And obviously the main thing what we're looking for from you is really to assess the manuscript using your expertise. And the decision that you make at this point is, do we send it out to peer review or do we reject without any review? So sometimes we call that a desk reject. So what I would like to, I don't know if you can see can you see my screen, the guide? So just to talk you through, you've all got access to this, or at least you should do at some point, but I would just like to talk through a few features of this initial evaluation guide. So you can see here, just to reiterate the publication criteria, it needs to be original research, obviously, no plagiarism, and it needs to not have been published elsewhere. I think this is pretty standard for all journals. The experiments and the analysis and the statistics need to be described in sufficient detail that the reviewers would be able to understand how things were done, would be able to replicate that. And the conclusions, of course, need to be supported by the data. This is something that may be very clear to you, whether or not the authors have done this, or it may be something you need reviewer inputs on. It needs to be intelligible, written in standard English, but just to pick up on that, our sub-scanners will be looking at the language, and if they feel that actually, it's fine, the reviewers will be able to understand this, you don't need to worry about it. What we're really looking for as well from you is an assessment of whether or not the way in which the work is done meets the standards of your field. And also is in keeping with data availability guidelines and reporting guidelines that are specific to your community. And you'll be able to link into the PLOS mental health specific criteria here. Other information that I'd like to draw your attention to, please make sure that you are reading all of the email information that's been provided before you start handling the manuscript. If a manuscript doesn't reach the publication criteria, you can reject, as we mentioned before. Don't feel obliged to just send out everything. You are within your rights to reject a paper. If you do send it out for peer review, though, this is very important. We do need preferably 2, in some cases 3 external reviewers. What we're looking for really is all of the expertise that would be needed to assess the paper are covered. We can, in some cases, move forward with the manuscript with just 1 external review if you yourself are able to provide an additional review that's detailed enough, and you yourself can provide the additional expertise that hasn't been covered by the reviewers. Obviously, this is quite time intensive for you, so ideally we do want 2 reviewers, and we do want all of the required expertise to be covered. If you feel that you can't send this out for peer review, it's fine to desk reject. There are several reasons why we would not send a paper out to review. One is if you happen to notice fundamental flaws. This is something that the internal staff will not be monitoring. So the internal staff will be looking at scope. Is it in scope for the journal? And they'll also be making sure that it's meeting ethical standards. But obviously you're the experts in the field, so you'll be the ones who can tell whether or not the methods are fundamentally flawed, or whether they're appropriate for the question that's being asked. And if you think there is such a serious error that this simply cannot be addressed by peer review, then it's fine to desk reject on this basis. Likewise, if you feel that the conclusions can just not be supported by the data, and sample sizes are way too small, and to increase sample sizes would take like months and months or a year, then we can reject on that basis too. It may be the rationale is just completely flawed, or the way in which the paper is presented, it just wouldn't be understood by the reviewers. That's also fine to desk reject on that basis. It could just be that it's not clear how the authors even came up with this. Where does this even fit in with the literature? It doesn't make sense why they're doing this. That's also fine. If you feel that there are some problems with the paper, but it still has potential, and maybe they just need to extensively reframe it. Maybe the data's there, the data's good, but they need to just completely reframe the paper. For instance, what we can do is like an open rejection. So in that case, the paper is rejected, but there's an explanation about why it's being rejected. And then if you feel that the authors could potentially address that in what would be, say, a normal 45-day time frame, which I'll talk about in a bit, then we could then encourage resubmission when they have addressed that. The reason we would do that rather than just sending it out for peer review is because then we don't want to waste reviewers' time knowing that it's just going to end up being rejected. We want to give the authors an option to address it or to go elsewhere. All other scenarios, though, send it out to review. As we mentioned, so there's some frequently asked questions here. You can look through, what do I do if there's poor language? Should it be rejected? As I mentioned, the language has already been checked, so don't worry about that. We don't provide copy editing, but there are services that we've partnered with. So for instance, the American Journal experts and Editage. So authors can be directed to this, and there's also plenty of tips as well on the page. You might get a paper and you think to yourself, oh, it doesn't really have any results. Please check the article type, because some journals will also accept, say, protocols, registered reports. What I would say at the moment is PLOS Mental Health is not considering registered reports at the moment. It's something we may do in the future. Please do flag up if you get a paper that does look like it is a registered report, for instance, because this is something that really should have been picked up before it reaches you. So that is that. And then let's say, okay, you send it out to review. Finding and securing reviewers is every editor's biggest peeve. It's not an easy job, and it's becoming harder. We're not going to pretend it's easy, but we do hope that the paper has all the reviewers that it needs within 1 to 2 weeks, just so that we can make sure we're getting a decision in a timely fashion to the authors. The reviewers obviously need to have appropriate expertise, both in the subject matter and the methodology. They should be actively publishing and not biased, and I'll talk about what that specifically means for us in a little bit. There are different strategies that you can use. You may already have your own strategies if you're a board member for another journal that work for you. Otherwise, it may just be worth trying different ways. With PLOS Mental Health, as with all PLOS journals, when you're inviting reviewers, this is done through the editorial manager system. So you won't have to, say, send separate emails from your personal email account. So moving back out the presentation, just to talk a little bit about this guide that you should have access to about finding reviewers. So what do we mean in terms of, suitable reviewers active in the field? Ideally, they should have published 5 or more papers on the topic. preferably as corresponding or last author, but I think sometimes that's not always essential as long as they have been clearly involved in the papers. Obviously, they have to have expertise in the area, if possible, also the methodology, but you may not always find someone who can cover both. So make sure that the reviewers are complementing each other in this respect. Reviewers should ideally be postdoctoral or more senior, but we can allow, say, PhD students to help their PI's review, for instance, and this is something that we can talk about. And obviously the reviewer has to be affiliated with an academic or government or non-for-profit research institution. In terms of ensuring that the reviewer, is not going to be biased, we ask that you please don't invite reviewers that are at the same institution as any of the authors on the paper. They shouldn't be listed as opposed reviewers. So every submission, you'll be able to see a section in which authors request excluded reviewers, and this should be honoured. Sometimes, however, if you find that it's a very small field and the authors have excluded like 100 people and you can't find anyone else, rather than just ignoring the list, I would personally go to the authors and see if they can lessen that list a little bit, or you can reach out to us for help. Ideally, the reviewer should not have collaborated with or published with any of the authors in the last 5 years. An exception to that perhaps could be if they've been a co-author on a very, very large consortium paper, they weren't really collaborating, they've not collaborated before or since, then that could be an exception, but ideally just avoid any co-publications in the last 5 years or so. And they shouldn't be located at the same institute as another reviewer, because we want our reviewer pool to be diverse as possible. One good tip, I would say, try to avoid going to the same small pool of reviewers. It can be tempting once you find people who say yes a lot, and it does save time, and they provide nice reviews, and that's great, but try to expand the pool of reviewers as much as possible. Try to not always ask your colleague down the hall. Sometimes it's absolutely fine to ask your colleague down the hall because they've got the perfect expertise, but try not to only do that. And I would advise using databases outside of editorial manager to search for reviewers. In terms of tips, as I said, you may already have your preferred ways of finding reviewers that work for you and that work for your field. It's always useful to reach out to researchers that you know, because you know that expertise exactly. It's easier to chase them a little bit. They're less likely to ghost on you. They're more likely to send you a nice report. Failing that, it's always good to reach out to researchers you maybe don't know them personally, but you know their work really well, so that you know their expertise well enough to know that they can properly assess the paper. If you do need to use a broader search, I mean, you'll have your preferred ways, but there's Web of Science, there's PubMed, there's Google Scholar. You can use the database that we have in Editorial Manager, but that database is very much dependent on the keywords that the reviewer provides. So someone who provides a lot of keywords for themselves tends to get more bombarded with reviewer requests than someone who doesn't put in any keywords. So we kind of want to avoid that happening. So it's always good to expand your search a little bit. And then you've got some additional tips here. Early career researchers do tend to have more time than senior researchers to be involved, and it's helpful for them to see the journey of a paper. As I mentioned, we do encourage co-reviewing. So if you have a senior researcher in mind and they may want to bring in that PhD student for experience, and then you're getting two perspectives, that's a really good way to get the paper reviewed. If you need statistical reviewers, let the journal know, we can help with that. Two tips really for securing reviewers, especially if you are reaching out to people you don't know. It's always a good idea to personalize the invitation template, and usually the best way to do that is to let them know why you've asked them. if you're inviting a reviewer and you know that they only cover part of the expertise of the paper, more often than not, they'll look at the invitation, they'll look at the abstract, and they'll think, well, no, I can't cover this, I don't have all of the expertise. But if you tell them specifically, I would be very interested in your view on, and then be very specific about that, they're more likely to feel comfortable accepting the invitation. And it's always good to, when you first go in there to invite reviewers, to set up your alternate reviewers, and that saves you logging in all the time. So the alternate reviewers will be automatically invited once a previous person declines or doesn't respond after a certain time. So it really just saves you time in the long run if you're not in a position to keep logging in to assign reviewers. And then there's some guidance here about inviting reviewers, setting expectations in terms of how long they're given, how many you should invite at once. So it can vary from field to field, and it can vary at different times of year, but we'd recommend starting off with a list of about 8 reviewers. And then that may, you may be able to find the 2 that you need within that. The reviewers are informed that they're given 10 days to submit the review, and we understand that is quite a short deadline, so you can obviously accept requests to extend that deadline within reason. So I think automatically anything less than, say, 21 days is fine, but do talk to us. If a reviewer comes back to you and said, look, I need an extra month, but you know that they are the perfect reviewer and they're going to be reliable and there's not really anyone else who can help, then please talk to us about that. You don't have to send reviewers reminders, that's done automatically. If a reviewer is really late and they automatically get unassigned, and you know them personally, I said, look, I was almost there, I just needed 1 or 2 days, that's fine, you can just re-invite them. If you have a paper, I've never personally come across a paper like this, but I know it can happen, where an editor just simply cannot find any reviewers at all. And I've seen stories on social media about papers being rejected because they couldn't find any reviewers. No, that's not a reason to reject a paper. Please do reach out to us if you need assistance finding reviewers. It may be you want to reassess the paper again, but I would advise still pushing forward and getting additional help to find the reviewers. And then, so you get all your review reports, maybe ideally 2 to 3 weeks, and then within the next few days you take a look at the reports and make your decisions. So the reports that you receive will be in a structured form. There may very well be discrepancies between the review reports, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but what I would say the key thing to remember here is not to count votes. If you have, say you have 3 reviewers and 2 say accept and 1 says reject, you don't just automatically accept. Maybe the reviewer who wants to reject is the only one with the expertise to understand why there's a fundamental error. So always consider the context of the criticism. When you get the review reports back, you have 4 available decisions, and I'll talk about what those decisions are. Regardless of the decision you make, we do ask that you customize the decision letter to the extent that authors understand why you've made the decision and what it is that they need to do to address anything. So let me go through here. So my share screen thing is now blocking my tab. So there we go. Making decisions. So you should also have access to this guide here. One thing you should decide when you get all the reviewer comments, which of these comments is necessary. Some reviewers will ask authors to go above and beyond and ask for a ridiculous amount of revisions because they maybe don't understand the editorial criteria or they're just picky. So just really think about, is this actually necessary for the paper to be in good shape? When you're giving weight to the reviewer comments, always consider that expertise. Is it that they've just misunderstood something? Or, as I said, are they the only ones that are qualified to understand something? So always think about where the reviewer is coming from. If you really can't make the decision on your own, if it's not clear cut, you can always reach out to one of us, or you can always reach out to one of the reviewers and ask them for clarification, or ask, say you have 3 reviewers, you can ask one reviewer to weigh in on another reviewer's comments. So it's always fine to get additional input if the reviewers are willing. This also talks about the 4 potential decisions that you have when the review reports come back in. So the first option we have is a major revision. So this is the case when the manuscript has potential to be published, but there may be substantial issues, and unless these issues are addressed, we can't proceed with the publication. When this is the case, authors have 45 days to revise and resubmit the manuscript. When you then receive that revision, you can choose whether or not you want to look over that yourself, if it's very clear to you, if you're very confident in what's been asked, or you can invite the original reviewers again to get their opinion on the revisions. There's also a minor revision option. So maybe it's almost there, it just needs some minor adjustments, maybe some minor textual adjustments, changes of figures. Again, authors have 45 days to do this, but upon resubmission, you may find it's much easier for you to just quickly assess whether or not the authors have satisfactorily addressed the comments. And then, of course, you may want to accept the manuscript, so it's ready to be accepted as is, and then it gets sent to production and publication. What I would say about this is there is no chance now for authors to change the manuscript. So if you think that the manuscript is almost there, but there's, this legend is not quite right, or this concept needs clarification, then you should go along the lines of a minor revision, because the authors won't get a chance to change the manuscript at this point. I know other publishers have what they call an accept in principle stage, where we say it's accepted if you do this, this, and this. We don't have this at PLOS, so you would need to do a minor revision here. And the final option really is when the revision comes back in, you may feel like actually we just need to reject this, perhaps, or if the review reports come back in, it may be that the authors just won't be able to address the criticisms, or it may be that they just made no attempt to address the criticisms. And in that case, no further action will be required from you unless the authors request an appeal. If we can do a similar, what we call open reject, if you feel like there's so much to do here, but there's still some potential, we could do the open reject, but when it does come back, then it's considered as a completely new submission. So yeah, as we mentioned, when the revision comes back, it may be ready for acceptance. The original reviewers may be re-invited, or it just may be you want to reject because the authors just didn't really address anything. What we would say in general is to try to avoid multiple and unnecessary rounds of revision. We try to keep it to 2 within reason, but we appreciate sometimes it can be a little bit more than that, especially because they can't edit it once it is accepted. As we mentioned, it's always a really good idea to customize the decision letter. So when you get your decision letter template, you'll see quite clearly where you're able to enter some text. What kind of constructive feedback can you give them? So it's always good to really guide the authors what you think is essential for them to address out of the reviewer comments, for instance, and what you think could be maybe, we know it's off scope, we know it's unrealistic, but maybe talk about it a little bit, that kind of guidance. Or if you're rejecting, it's very important to be very clear here about why you're rejecting and what you felt was fundamentally flawed based on your assessment and based on the reviewer comments, as long as there's some clear direction for the authors. And then some guidance here just to finish off about setting expectations for us and for you, really. As Felicity mentioned, ideally you'll be seeing the manuscript through its entire journey. If at any point, I mean, this is something that the internal staff will be keeping an eye on, but if at any point you yourself have any ethical concerns, please notify PLOS in the first instance rather than contacting the authors directly. Or if you notice any ethical concerns in the way the reviewer has conducted the review, then again, please notify us and please avoid contacting them again in the future. So for instance, if they request constantly self-citations and this kind of thing. The last thing I want to point out here, and especially it's good for you to keep in mind when you are, say, writing to the authors, is that authors can opt in to publish the peer review history, and this will include the decision emails that you send them. So if they do choose to have this option, alongside that paper, the readers will be able to see the reviews and they will see the decision that you made and why you made it. So that's another reason to make sure that you're being quite clear in your decision letter. And then, yeah, then I think I'm done and handing back to Felicity.
Thanks, Carly. I'll just share my screen. So I just, before I go on to this slide, I put something in the chat about the EM database. I just wanted to call out that it's not a curated database of potential reviewers. It's basically a list of anyone who's ever been registered as a reviewer. So the contact information might be out of date, as may the keywords potentially. So just be mindful if you were looking through it, it's better to find a reviewer through your own networks and your own searches, have that email from there, vet them as you would any other reviewer, and then try and see if they have a reviewer account by searching their email. And if they don't, you can register them yourself. So yeah, we've talked at you a lot, given you a lot of information, but you can refer back to a lot of the quick guides we've gone through. And these are all on the resources for editors page here, and you can see them. They're all linked in the different categories: invitations, your initial evaluation. Everything we've gone through is here. So do go through those, refer to them when you need them as well, and have a look at the frequently asked questions. Those are quite useful. It's based on what we've frequently been asked, so it's likely these are things you might want to know as well. And I'll call out this: if you do have any issues with your invitations particularly, then do reach out to us. For journal contact and for queries on manuscripts, then reach out to the mental health at plos.org email. If you have anything to ask about or you need support as part of your academic editor role, then contact my team on edboard support at plos.org. That's for things like, I need to resign, or I am not getting very good invitations, or I'm getting too many invitations, that kind of thing. Just please reach out to us and we can make adjustments. And so now we have some time for Q&A. There was a question in the chat, or I think it was possibly directly to me, asking about impact factor. And I said I would ask Carly to talk about that, as you are better placed to do so. So would you like to start with that, Carly?
What was the question? Was it, do we have an impact?
Yes, it was essentially, let me just grab it. I would like to know the impact factor goal for our journal.
So in general, we don't aim for a specific impact factor, just because, you know, in general for us that there's more than just the impact factor that kind of dictates what makes a journal, useful. But in terms of, say, the editorial space that we're in, if it makes it easier for you to think, okay, where would the bar be similar to? As we're launching and for the foreseeable future, we're going to be in a similar space as, say, PLOS One in terms of our editorial bar. This may slightly increase over time as we become established, but whilst we are still launching and considering that we would consider negative results and replication studies, then we're in a similar space as PLOS One. So if you really want a number in terms of impact factor, we're looking probably around the 4 or 5 region, if that kind of makes it easier to visualize where we would be in the space.
We have another question from Martin. What is the reason for not offering registered reports directly? Carly will cover this.
This is just something that we didn't start off with, just given the kind of assessing the need for it and how frequently we were expecting to get them. But it is absolutely something that I would say almost certainly is planned as we move forward, and is something we have already discussed about making sure that we include registered reports. It's just something that wasn't initially at the offset, but it will certainly come up. And we appreciate that there are other journals in this space that do publish registered reports, so we're very mindful of that. But yeah, absolutely, it's something that we will have.
Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask? I'm trying to remember that we had a couple that were from the pre-registration. We did have a question about the pre-fee waivers in the first year of submission. So basically a question about compensation, and we do get this a lot, and it is a tricky one. We understand we ask for a lot of your effort and time, and we really appreciate that, but it is a volunteer role, so there is no financial compensation, and that's because at the minute PLOS doesn't offer financial compensation because it introduces that competing interest, and it's just not something we can do on the scale. Our editorial boards are very big, and we're a non-profit, so it's just not possible on the scale that we have. But it's always good to look if your institution or the country you're working in makes you eligible for a fee waiver, if you were wanting to submit your own research, which we are very welcome to receiving. We also had a question on, are we open to special issue suggestions? That one's probably for Carly.
Yeah, absolutely. Any suggestions that you have, we've already received some anyway, but any suggestions you have for special issues, collections, specific commissioned article types for front matter, so like a review or an opinion piece or an editorial, we're always open to ideas and suggestions, even if it's a case of, oh, you don't have this section, why don't you have this section, something like that. You're the experts, it's your field, so any ideas you have are always very, very welcome.
I've had another one in the chat, which is kind of similar to what I was just mentioning. Is there any special path for editors to submit their own paper? Definitely, please do submit your own research should you wish to, but it will go through the standard submission process, and that is just because it should get the same peer review, there won't be any special sort of compensation or kind of special treatment in that way to make sure the science is robust and everything. But we do welcome your research as well.
Can I just add to that? So that's for original research articles. If you are interested, though, in a review or an opinion piece or a comment, for instance, then I would encourage you to email me directly with a plan of that piece or the text of that piece, and then that's something that I can discuss with the EICs and the senior editorial board. My reason for saying that is then it's easier for us to keep track. We can discuss it with you, we can work on it with you, and then obviously because when we commission front half pieces, you don't pay the APC. So that is something to keep in mind as well.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anything new in the chat. Please feel free to unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask something now if you want to, but we'll sort of close the webinar now and move on to the kind of optional breakout room portion of the meeting. And I'll just finish by saying, please do reach out to us anytime. And yeah, we're here to help. The emails I had on the other slide, the journal contact, or my team, the EdBoard support team, are here to help. And yeah, engage with us on social media. There's the Twitter handle of the PLOS Mental Health Journal. You're a PLOS ambassador, so be mindful of that, and please do share your research and the papers you handle and everything. And thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for joining the board as well. We're really pleased to have you with us. Carly, if you have anything to say, please go for it.
No, I was just going to also echo what you were saying and just thank everyone very much for being willing to be part of this. We appreciate you're very busy. This is additional time that you're not being compensated for. So we really do very much appreciate it. And we want you to feel like you're part of this journal and have a voice in this journal as well. So yeah, just thank you for agreeing to take part.
Okay, we can move to I will stop recording, but we can move to the breakout rooms if you want to join those, but I'll just stop the recording first. Stop recording.